Welcome to Story Loft, a safe space where we explore the many facets of loss and grief through personal stories. Loss is a universal experience that touches all of our lives in different ways. We believe in the power of sharing these experiences and finding connections in our most vulnerable moments. In each episode, we bring you stories from people who have faced loss and found their way forward. These narratives let us know that while grief can be isolating, we're not alone in our experiences. Storyloft is more than just a channel. It's a community, a place where your experiences are validated, your emotions are honored, and your journey is respected. Whether you are here seeking comfort, understanding, or simply just to listen, know that you are welcome. So, find a quiet moment, perhaps grab a cup of tea, and join us as we explore these touching stories of loss, grief, and resilience. Remember, at Storyloft, your stories matter, and healing is possible. The late autumn wind ripped around Rachel as she stood in the cemetery, her black dress billowing around her legs. The gray sky mirrored the somber mood, threatening rain at any moment. She clutched a white rose in her gloved hand. Nobody could see, but beneath her gloves, her knuckles were white with tension. Rachel stared at the freshly dug grave, her mind grappling with the finality before her and the tangled emotions that came with it. Rachel's father, Arthur, lay in that polished oak casket, about to be lowered into the cold earth. She hadn't spoken to him in years, their relationship fractured by old arguments and stubbornness on both sides. Now, all chances for reconciliation were gone, leaving behind a tangle of regret and unresolved things that needed to be said. As the pastor's words reached her and slowly settled in, Rachel's mind drifted to another absence, one that had been gnawing at her since she arrived at the funeral home. Her sister, Claire, was nowhere to be seen. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, their own relationship splintered by the same event that had driven Rachel away from their father. A movement at the edge of the gathered mourners caught Rachel's eye. Looking over, she recognized the figure approaching. It was Claire. Rachel could see that she looked older now, and somehow smaller. Their eyes met across the grave, a decade of silence and hurt stretching between them. As the service concluded, and the other mourners began to disperse, Rachel found herself rooted at the spot. Claire hesitated. Then she slowly made her way over to where Rachel stood. "Rachel?" Claire said softly, her voice barely audible. "You came," Rachel replied, with a bit of surprise in her voice. An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared history. Rachel studied her sister's face, noting the new lines around her eyes, the streak of gray in her once perfectly dark hair. She wondered what changes Claire saw in her. "I wasn't sure I would," Claire admitted, her gaze dropping to the grave. "But he was our father, despite everything." Rachel nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Despite everything," she echoed. The first few drops of rain began to fall, pattering softly on the leaves and the grass around them. Neither woman moved to leave, as if the physical discomfort was a penance for years of absence. "I heard about Michael," Claire said suddenly, her eyes meeting Rachel's again. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. I wanted to reach out, but—" The mention of her son's name sent a fresh wave of grief crashing through Rachel. Michael, her beautiful boy, taken far too soon by a drunk driver just 2 years ago. The loss had nearly broken her, and in her darkest moments she had longed for the comfort of family. The very family she had pushed away. "It's been hard," Rachel managed, her voice cracking. "Some days I expect to hear him calling for me, to see him walk through the door." Claire reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it, her hand falling back to her side. "I can't imagine," she said softly. "I wish I had been there for you." The sincerity in Rachel's voice broke something open in Rachel's chest. Tears she had been holding back all day began to fall, mingling with the rain on her cheeks. "I needed you," she whispered. "Both of you. But I was too proud, too angry to reach out." Claire's own eyes filled with tears. "We were all too proud," she said. "Dad, he regretted how things ended up between you two. He kept your picture on his nightstand, you know, right up until the end." This revelation hit Rachel like a physical blow. She thought of all of the birthdays, holidays, and milestones that had passed without her father's presence. All the times she had picked up the phone to call him, only to put it down again, the weight of old grievances too heavy to overcome. "I never gave him a chance to make it right," Rachel said, her voice thick with regret. "And now it's too late." Claire shook her head, taking a step closer. "Maybe for Dad, but not for us. It's not too late for us, Rachel. If you want." Rachel looked at her sister, really looked at her for the first time in years. She saw the same pain, the same longing for connection reflected in Claire's eyes. In that moment, the old hurts and resentments seemed to pale in comparison to the chance for reconciliation standing before her. With a sob, Rachel closed the distance between them, pulling Claire into her tight embrace. Claire stiffened for a moment, then melted into the hug while her own tears began to flow freely. "I've missed you," Rachel whispered. "God, I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too," Claire replied. They stood like that for a long moment, years of separation dissolving in the rain and shared grief. When they finally pulled apart, both women laughed softly, wiping at their tear-stained cheeks. "Look at us," Claire said, gesturing at their rain-soaked clothes. "What a pair we make." Rachel smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on her face. "Dad would have loved this, you know. Us. Making a scene at his funeral." Claire chuckled, nodding. "He always did have a flair for the dramatic. Remember that time he showed up at your school play dressed as a giant carrot?" The memory, long buried under layers of hurt and anger, surfaced unexpectedly. Rachel found herself laughing. The sound was strange, but welcome in the somber setting. "I was so embarrassed. But he was so proud, sitting there in the front row, orange face paint and all." As they shared more memories, the rain began to let up, a weak sun peeking through the clouds. Rachel looked down at the white rose still clutched in her hand, then back at her sister. "Would you like to?" She gestured towards the grave. Claire nodded with understanding, and together they approached the casket. Rachel gently placed her rose on top, Claire's hand coming to rest beside hers. "Goodbye, Dad," Rachel said softly. "I'm sorry we wasted so much time." "We'll do better," Claire added, squeezing Rachel's hand. "We'll make you proud." As they turned to leave the cemetery, Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The grief was still there, for her father, for her son, for the years lost to stubbornness and pride. But alongside it was a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. "Would you like to come over for a coffee?" Rachel asked as they reached the parking lot. I think we have a lot to talk about." Claire's smile was warm. "I'd like that very much," she said. As they walked back to their cars, Rachel glanced back at the gravesite one last time. The sun had fully emerged, casting a golden light over the scene. She could not help but feel that somewhere her father was smiling down on them, grateful that his passing had brought his daughters back together. The road ahead would not be easy. There were years of hurt to overcome, trust to rebuild. But as Rachel and Claire drove away from the cemetery, following each other to Rachel's home, they carried with them the first tender shoots of reconciliation, a new beginning born from an ending, and the hope that even the deepest wounds could, with time and love, begin to heal. Ten-year-old Ethan stood at the edge of the backyard, a small shovel clutched in his trembling hands. The weight of it felt unfamiliar. He used this shovel countless times before to help Buddy dig holes all over the yard, much to his parents' dismay. But now, the earth he was about to turn would serve a different purpose. Buddy had been more than just a dog. He was Ethan's best friend, confidant, and constant companion for as long as he could remember. The golden retriever had been by his side through scraped knees, first days of school, and long summer afternoons filled with adventure. Now, the absence of Buddy's wagging tail and eager bark left a silence so deep it seemed to swallow Ethan's entire world. It had been a week since Buddy passed away. 7 days that felt like an eternity. 7 nights of clutching Buddy's worn collar to his chest, trying to muffle his sobs in his pillow so his parents would not hear. They meant well with their soft words and gentle hugs, but they couldn't fill the Buddy-shaped hole in Ethan's heart. Ethan's mom stood on the back porch, watching her son with worried eyes. She held a small oak sapling in a pot that Ethan had chosen. "Buddy was strong like an oak," he said in the nursery, his voice barely above a whisper as he choked back his tears. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Ethan pushed the shovel into the soft earth. Each scoop of dirt felt like a mountain being moved. His arms ached, but it was nothing compared to the pain in his chest. As he dug, memories flooded his mind, as vivid as if they were happening right before his eyes. He remembered the day they brought Buddy home, a bundle of golden fur that fit in the palm of his dad's hand. Ethan had been only 3, but the memory of Buddy's wet nose touching his cheek for the first time was something he could never forget. Another shovelful of dirt. Ethan recalled teaching Buddy to fetch, the clumsy puppy tripping over his own feet in his excitement. They'd spent hours in this very yard with Ethan throwing tennis balls and Buddy happily bringing it back, his tail wagging so hard that his whole body shook. The hole grew deeper. Ethan thought of stormy nights when he had been afraid of the thunder and Buddy had climbed into his bed, his warm, comforting presence that chased away the fear. He thought of the time he'd fallen off his bike and scraped his knee badly, and how Buddy had licked away his tears and stayed by his side until the pain subsided. Tears began to blur Ethan's vision, but he blinked them away furiously. He had to be strong. Buddy had always been strong for him. As the hole neared the right depth, a particularly nostalgic memory surfaced. It was from just a few weeks ago, before Buddy got sick. They had been playing in the backyard as usual, but Buddy had seemed slower, less enthusiastic about chasing the ball. Instead, he settled down next to Ethan under the big maple tree, resting his head on Ethan's lap. They had sat there for hours, Ethan stroking Buddy's soft fur, neither needing to move or speak. It had been a perfect moment of contentment and companionship. Ethan did not know then that it would be one of their last moments together. The finality of it all hit Ethan like a punch in the gut. He dropped to his knees beside the hole he had been digging. A sob heaved through his body. "Buddy, I miss you," he cried. "I miss you so much." Ethan's mom was at his side in an instant, her arms wrapping around him. He turned and buried his face in her shoulder, his small body shaking. She held him tightly, and they cried together out there on the grass. "It's not fair," Ethan hiccuped between sobs. "Why did he have to go? He was supposed to stay with me forever." His mom stroked his hair gently. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Buddy loved you so much. And the love you shared, that does last forever. It's right here." She placed a hand over his heart. Ethan's sobs gradually subsided and were replaced by quiet sniffles. He pulled away from his mom and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. His gaze fell on the oak sapling waiting to be planted. Ethan got to his feet. "Can we plant it now?" he asked, his voice sounding deeper than normal from crying. Together, Ethan and his mom carefully removed the sapling from its pot and placed it in the hole. As they began to fill the earth around it, Ethan spoke softly, almost to himself. Buddy loved digging holes. He would have liked helping with this. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face at the thought. It hurt, but it was a good kind of hurt. The kind that meant Buddy would never truly be gone as long as Ethan remembered him. When the tree was securely planted, Ethan stepped back to look at it. The young oak stood barely taller than himself, its leaves rustling gently in the breeze. It looked small and vulnerable, but Ethan knew that with time and care it would grow strong and tall. From his pocket, Ethan pulled out Buddy's collar. He ran his fingers over the worn leather and the tag that still bore his best friend's name. With love, he placed the collar at the base of the tree, partially burying it in the freshly turned earth. "There," he said softly. "Now a part of you will always be here, Buddy. You can help the tree grow." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Ethan remained by the tree. He sat cross-legged on the ground, talking quietly to the sapling as if Buddy could hear him through its leaves. He shared memories, laughed at funny moments, and yes, he cried some more. But with each word, each tear, Ethan felt the crushing weight of grief lift just a little bit. In the days and weeks that followed, Ethan visited the tree every day. He watered it faithfully, making sure it had everything it needed to thrive. Sometimes he brought his homework and sat beneath its branches, imagining Buddy lying beside him as he always had. As seasons passed, the oak grew steadily taller and stronger. New leaves budded in the spring, reminding Ethan of new beginnings. The tree's shade offered relief on hot summer days, just as Buddy once had. Autumn brought a cascade of golden leaves that reminded Ethan of Buddy's soft fur, and in the winter the tree stood strong against the cold. Years later, Ethan would sit beneath the now towering oak, his back against its sturdy trunk. Though the acute pain of loss had long since faded, the love remained, as strong and deep-rooted as the tree that had grown from his grief. In the gentle rustle of leaves he could still hear the echo of a beloved bark, reminding him that while life is fleeting, love and memories live forever. if you want them to. Sarah stood in the doorway of Robert's studio, her hand resting lightly on the wooden frame. Dust motes danced in the shaft of afternoon sunlight that streamed through the window, illuminating the room that had been untouched for months. The familiar scent of linseed oil and turpentine hung in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the man who had spent countless hours in this space. Her eyes were drawn to the large canvas propped on the easel in the center of the room. It was Robert's last painting, left unfinished when he had passed away suddenly 6 months ago. Sarah had avoided the studio since then, unable to face the stark reality of his absence that the room represented. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. Her footsteps echoed on the wood floor as she approached the canvas. It was a landscape, a view of the rolling hills and ancient oak trees that surrounded their countryside home. Robert had captured the essence of the golden hour, that magical time just before sunset when the world seemed bathed in warm, honeyed light. The foreground was complete, full of wild flowers and purples, yellows, and whites. Sarah could almost smell their sweet fragrance. The middle ground showed the gnarled trunks and sprawling branches of the oak trees, their leaves a patchwork of greens and golds. But the background, the distant hills and sky, was only roughly sketched in, waiting for Robert's skilled hand to bring it to life. Sarah's fingers hovered over the canvas, tracing the air above Robert's brush strokes. She remembered watching him work, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands moving with confident precision. He would often talk as he painted, sharing his thoughts on color and light, on capturing the essence of a moment. "It's all about feeling, Sarah," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. "You have to paint what you feel, not just what you see." A lump formed in Sarah's throat as the memory washed over her. She sank into the worn stool in front of the easel, her eyes blurring with unshed tears. The unfinished painting seemed to symbolize all that had been left undone, all the moments they would never share. As she sat there, surrounded by Robert's things, his paints and brushes, his reference books and sketches, Sarah felt a small spark of something she had not experienced in months. A desire to create. She had dabbled in painting over the years, encouraged by Robert's enthusiastic teachings, but had never taken it seriously. Now, looking at the unfinished canvas, she felt a pull she could not ignore. With soft hands, she reached for Robert's palette. The dried paint formed a colorful crust around the edges. She picked up a brush, feeling its weight and balance. It felt both foreign and familiar in her hand. "I don't know if I can do this, Robert," she whispered to the empty room, "but I think I need to try." Over the next few weeks, Sarah fell into a routine. Each afternoon, she would make herself a cup of tea and carry it into the studio. She spent hours studying Robert's techniques, poring over his notebooks, and practicing on small canvases before she dared to touch the unfinished painting. At first, her attempts were clumsy and frustrating. She mixed colors that turned muddy, made her brush strokes that felt awkward and out of place. More than once, she was tempted to give up, to leave the paint as Robert had left it. But something kept drawing her back. As time went on, Sarah found herself improving. She learned to see the way Robert had seen, to understand the interplay of light and shadow, the subtle variations in color that brought a scene to life. More than that, she began to feel what Robert had always talked about, that indefinable connection between artist and subject, the ability to translate emotion onto canvas. The painting became a journey of healing, As she worked on completing the background, filling in the distant hills and sky, Sarah felt as if she were somehow communicating with Robert. Each brush stroke was a conversation, a shared moment. She mixed colors she knew he would have loved, added details she could almost hear him suggesting. There were difficult days, of course. Days when grief overwhelmed her and she could do nothing but sit in the studio and weep. Days when she felt like an imposter, attempting to complete a masterpiece she had no right to touch. But there were also days of unexpected joy, moments when she stood back from the canvas and saw something beautiful emerging from her efforts. As summer dwindled into autumn, the painting neared completion. The hills in the background now rolled gently into the distance, painted with the warm hues of early fall. The sky was a masterpiece of color, streaks with gold and pinks and purples that reflected in the still visible patches of summer green below. On the anniversary of Robert's death, Sarah stood before the finished painting. She had worked through the night, making final touches, pouring all her love and grief and hope into the canvas. Now, in the soft light of dawn, she saw not just Robert's work, or her own, but a true collaboration, a visual representation of their life together and the love they had shared. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but for the first time in a year, they were not purely tears of sorrow. There was gratitude there, and a sense of peace she had thought she lost forever. She had not only completed Robert's painting, but had also found a way to carry forward his passion and his memory. Sarah signed the painting in the bottom corner, her name next to Robert's. As she did so, she felt the warmth in her chest, as if Robert's hand were guiding hers. She knew then that while the pain of losing him would never fully disappear, she had found a way to keep him close, to continue their story. The studio was no longer a shrine to what had been lost, but instead a place of creation and continuity. Sarah looked around at the easels and canvases, the jars of brushes and the tubes of paint. She saw not the end of something, but a new beginning. Picking up a blank canvas, she placed it on the easel. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the white surface with possibility. Sarah picked up a brush, dipped it in the paint, and began to create something entirely new. As she worked, she could almost hear Robert's voice, warm and encouraging. "That's it, Sarah. Paint what you feel." And so she did, her brush moving across the canvas, capturing not just what she saw, but the love, the loss, the healing, and the hope that filled her heart. In completing Robert's unfinished painting, Sarah had not only honored his memory, but had also discovered her own artistic voice. She had found a way to move forward, while keeping the best parts of the past alive within her. The unfinished personal masterpiece was complete, but Sarah's journey as an artist and her path through grief to healing was just beginning. Thank you for joining us here at Story Loft. We hope these stories have touched your heart and perhaps helped you feel less alone in your own journey. If you found value in today's stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It helps us reach more people who might need to hear these stories of hope and healing. Remember, every story of loss and healing is unique and valuable. If you have a story you would like to share with our community, we would be honored to hear from you. You can reach out to us at storyloft@outlook.com, listed in the description box below. Your experiences could be the light that guides someone else through their darkest times. Whether you're sharing or listening, you're an important part of the Story Loft family. We are here to support each other, to learn from one another, and to remind ourselves that even in grief, we are not alone. Until next time, be kind to yourself, and remember that healing is a journey. Take care, and we will see you next episode.